Hi, good evening. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan. Thank you for joining me as I continue to look at the science around COVID-19 and ask some difficult questions, inconvenient questions. And we've recently been hearing all through the news about this disease X. What is it? Is it characterized? Is it just an anticipation of something to come? Well, what I'll be doing today is that I'll first be taking a quick look at the World Economic Forum Davos meeting where they were talking about disease X. I'll also be making reference to a paper here looking at the challenge study, which I think is the primary issue that we're up against. And critically, I'm going to be looking as well at the science around what I'm concerned about with regards to these challenge studies. So, this is the question that I'm concerned about because I'm thinking to myself, unless I'm mistaken, and I'm looking from the front, COVID is not done with us. Now, it's COVID 19 in the sense that we would have thought that by now we would have resolved all the issues around COVID. And I suspect that there is a feeling among the scientific elite that, listen, if we keep talking about COVID, it demonstrates that maybe we didn't get the strategies right in the first place. That's a question that they will have to answer. Uh, but let's get back to the point in question. Here are the speakers that were present, and the link is in the description. We had the director of the World Health Organization, Tedros. We had Shayaman Bishan, who is from the World Economic Forum in Geneva. We had somebody from the Royal Philips, I'm not sure what that is, Roy Jacobs. As well, you had Preetha Reddy, this is India, private sector healthcare. You had the Minister of Health from Brazil. You had the CEO from the American Heart Association. And you also had the chairman of the board for AstraZeneca. So they had quite a group of people there to look at it from multiple angles, including the fact of disease X. Do they need vaccines for it? And this is fundamentally what I think that they are focused towards. Let me just be clear about something. If there has not been full clarity about the outcomes with COVID 19, the origins of the virus with COVID 19, the decisions about what were done in the pandemic, if there is no recognition, if there is no audit of that, to move on as if nothing has happened is only in the interest of the people who may not want to be audited. But more critically, this is not about right or wrong. For anybody who is observing around them, JN.1, this is the new variant, is not done with us. For everyone who has been exposed over Christmas, the next 6 months are going to be interesting because this is where we actually see whether or not this is just a cold or this is one beast of a virus. My anticipation based on autoimmunity is that this is a beast, and we need to be prepared for it. So let's just hear what a few of the things that were said in the Davos meeting.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed distinguished panelists, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this very important discussion this morning. You know, we have a catchy title, but I think what's behind it is basically how do we prepare for next emergency? How do we prepare our health system overall for next pandemic? We all know very well, there will be viruses, there will be pathogens, there will be outbreaks. The idea is how do we prepare to contain those? How do we prepare outbreaks from becoming full-blown pandemics? We have been working on this for some time. Actually, there This session links very well to some of the initiatives that the Center for Health and Healthcare at the World Economic Forum is working on. By the way, my name is Shyam Bishen, and I head up the Center for Health and Healthcare at the World Economic Forum. So we've been working on this. There is an initiative called Partnership for Health Systems, Sustainability and Resilience. Many of the folks.
So, just to be clear here, as he talks about what they're focused on, that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing that they're focused on. And so, it's important for us to reflect on what I think are important points around the pandemic and pandemics in general, that you have to prepare and you have to focus. But one of the issues is that when you look at the way that they have been preparing, they haven't listened to all of the points. And as you say, anybody who has listened to Geert Vanden Bossche will recognize what I'm talking about. I wish they were as prepared listening to alternative voices as they could have been. I was specifically interested in what Tedros had to say from the WHO, and so I will play that clip as well so that you can hear his thoughts.
Honor always to have Dr. Tedros with us, the Director General of the World Health Organization. And Dr. Tedros, may I ask you to answer that very simple question to start with? Thank you.
Can you rephrase maybe the question?
Yes, of course. At the highest level, what do you think health systems should prioritize for an effective response to a potential crisis?
Yeah, I think that's a big question, but I would like to start with especially the disease X. It's attracting a lot of attention, and I hope you have seen in the social media. But it's not a new idea. The first time we used the terminology was in 2018. The discussions were in 2017. I was just new Director General. As you know, we annually list the emerging diseases. And MERS could be one.
And since there are some pauses in there, he goes on to point out that it's not just they anticipated that they would have a outbreak of a virus from 2018. They had considered MERS, which is one of the variants of the SARS coronavirus, and they then got in 2019 COVID-19, which is a little bit of a coincidence, but taking that away. The point is that they recognized at that time this potential existed. My point is that even though it may be great to move on, we haven't yet properly addressed what I think is the big issues that need to be resolved around the pandemic. So that then leads me back to the point about disease X. Is it really just COVID-19 rebranded? Really important questions. Now, I have said this before, and I'll highlight it again, that we are in a bit of a hurricane around COVID-19 in the sense that we are in what I call the eye of the pandemic storm. And I made this post today on Twitter. And this was about what I sense in terms of the eye of the pandemic storm. What you have here is an eye. And the eye usually is, it's dead calm in it if you have ever been in a hurricane. And around it, you have these winds spinning quite fast. The reason why the eye of the hurricane is so important is that if the eye passes over you, you will have strong winds coming from one direction. It then stops in the eye because there is no wind, it's spinning around it. But when the other side hits you, it starts at full force going in the opposite direction. That's what causes a hurricane to be so devastating, is that the winds then change direction suddenly. And this is what I'm anticipating around COVID-19. This is no longer really a respiratory disease. You may see it in terms of some respiratory patterns, but it's not actually going to be a respiratory disease. As I have said before, COVID-19 is an autoimmune disease. And an autoimmune disease, viral mediated, triggering the immune response to target the different organs, can present in a multitude of ways. It's not just the lungs. It could be the heart. It could be the kidneys. Critically, with regards to Omicron, it's likely to be the brain, neurology. We have to be prepared for these transitions because we have just had what I consider to be a challenge study. So, just to give you some context here, this is a paper that I've got in the link here. And essentially, they were looking at SARS-CoV-2 spike protein vaccines protecting hamsters from SARS-CoV-2 challenge. The word that I want you to notice here is SARS-CoV-2 challenge. So what they did is they took a number of hamsters here and they immunized them intramuscularly with 2 injections of their vaccine. And this one had aluminum hydroxide. So it wasn't any of the typical vaccines. The point I'm making is the principle of what they were looking for. So after they vaccinated them, they then challenged them intranasally with SARS-CoV-2. And so they made sure that prior to the vaccine virus challenge, the vaccine-induced antibodies were very high. And they found that when that occurred, there was protection. And this is what we saw in the first phase of the pandemic. 6 days after the infection, the vaccinated hamsters did not have any weight loss associated with infection, and critically, they had significantly reduced lung pathology. Now, this is the point that I need you to understand if you want to try and grasp what I'm focused on in terms of what I call the next phase of the pandemic. So you understand the basics, this is an image of a normal set of lungs. This is what you breathe in. This here is the trachea, and the air you breathe then spreads throughout these lungs to then exchange to get oxygen and blow off carbon dioxide. The unit of these lungs are alveoli, these little sacs of air that when the air comes in, it exchanges with oxygen and so on. And this is what it looks like. And you can see the bloodstream here. This is a blood vessel coming, and this blood vessel is carrying deoxygenated blood, and then it is then oxygenated, it goes back to the heart. So the lungs are a critical part of how the body functions. When you look on the inside of the alveoli, I've got here what I'm looking at with a challenge study. This here is the lining of the alveoli. It's a very thin lining. And this here is the blood vessel that it tends to be associated with. The oxygen comes in, it crosses, and it goes into the red blood cells. The carbon dioxide from the red blood cells is released and it's blown out. So this unit, alveoli of the lungs, is what was the problem in prior challenge studies. So in this particular study, what they made sure of is that they made sure that they took the left lung of the hamsters. So this is them here taking the left lung of the hamsters. They isolated it 6 days after they challenged them, and they fixed it in formaldehyde. And then they process it, looking in all these sections for areas of inflammation after the challenge study. And the reason they did this is because in prior challenge studies that they had done also with hamsters, they found in the vaccinated hamsters, every single one had immune pathology on challenge. That means, and so that you get this, when the virus was blown into the lungs, you ended up with significant inflammation in the lungs, like an allergic type response, what we call T helper 2 response. So this is why I said the next 6 months are going to be interesting across the world, because based on the science, if you have primed the immune system and you then challenge by getting lots of virus to go into organs in an immune system that has been primed, you should, in theory, from a scientific point of view, end up with quite a significant and unusual pathology in the lungs. Now, the problem that we have with regards to COVID-19 is that it's not just the lungs, because we have viral dissemination. That means the virus goes into multiple organs. And so, in theory, you can see this kind of pattern occurring across the body. That's my concern. That's why I think that disease X should be COVID-19. That's what we need to figure out. That's what we need to prepare for. Not looking for some other unusual pathogen when we haven't even resolved the issue about COVID-19, where it came from. You're looking for another one. Resolve that first. Do the audit on the pandemic. See what you did right. See what you did wrong. Acknowledge where the mistakes were made. And critically, that's how you take the learnings from the pandemic to prepare for the next. There is no learning if there is no audit. There is no science if there is no autopsy. These are the things that we should have been learning from the COVID-19 pandemic. If we continue along this line, disease X in the next 6 months to a year, I predict, it's very difficult to know timing, but based on autoimmunity, if you have a scientific background, just think about it. The immune system is primed. The immune system is now being exposed all the time to high levels of a virus spike protein that it has been primed to. Whilst there are IgG4 antibodies, there is likely to be a limited response because they suppress the immune system. What happens when these levels fall? That's the question that we have in front of us. And that's where we have to really start thinking and preparing, because that, to me, is the disease X that we really, really need to be worried about. Have a great evening.